so much of our work as community creators comes down to our ability to build bridges and unlikely connections, and sometimes in some of the darkest places. And look no further for a living, breathing, walks the walk and talks the talk example of what it looks like to infuse their process and their business with the spirit of community building. This episode might be a little unorthodox because, as you'll hear, our guest doesn't manage or really consider themselves a community creator. But as you will find in the incredible amount of insights and wisdom infused in this episode, they essentially take a community-centric approach to everything that they do, and especially to their storytelling. So I am particularly delighted to bring this episode into the world, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Dear Bree, an advice column for community conundrums, fiascos, and drama. This season of Dear Bree is sponsored by our friends over at Heartbeat. Heartbeat is an all-in-one community platform, and it's the one I chose to host my own community. Your members can finally have events, conversation, content, and even courses in one distraction-free, intimate, customized home. I chose Heartbeat for 3 reasons. First, Heartbeat is unparalleled in their events management features. Events are a core part of my community architecture, and their features make my life so much easier. Second is segmentation. It's super easy to break my community into smaller, more niche subgroups and create a more customized experience for that group in Heartbeat. And finally, their courses. Being able to host my educational materials and learning journey in a community-first platform makes my community that much more valuable and retention that much stickier. I'm an affiliate with Heartbeat, which means when you sign up through my link in the show notes, I get paid a small amount at no extra charge to you. Thank you for supporting my work in that way. And finally, I usually record this podcast from Hawaii Island, so a special thank you to the Kanaka Maoli people on whose land I currently reside. Our letter today deals with creating a vibrant and engaged community under the pressure of big goals. Our guest today might be surprising to our listeners because they don't necessarily run a community, but I asked them to come onto the show for a couple of reasons. First, I want to introduce everyone to Jelani Memory. Jelani, thank you for joining us on today's episode.
Oh, so happy to be here.
Jelani Memory is currently VP and publisher at DK, where he oversees the A Kid's Book About imprint. He's also the founder of A Kids Co., a groundbreaking media company that empowers children and families through meaningful and inclusive content. He's been awarded the Eleanor Roosevelt Bravery in Literature Award, and Jelani also previously co-founded Circle, the parental control app, not to be confused with the community platform that we talk a lot about on this podcast. Fun fact, actually, Jelani was the person who showed me Circle. Jelani has revolutionized children's publishing by tackling important topics like systemic racism, self-love, and climate change. And I'm so honored in his extremely busy schedule that he was able to make some time to join us. You to come on this show for a couple of reasons, Jelani. The first was you were one of my very first clients, and I came on to help build a community for A Kids Co. customers. Even though we sunset that community, Jelani, I know you've always been super community oriented, and I think you're going to have a lot of great insights to share. Second, I had the privilege of being in the room when you worked with Ben Sand to help him create A Kid's Book About white privilege. I was blown away by how you turned a book writing process, something that's usually so individualistic, and you turned it into this communal experience. I believe that was your method for writing and publishing. Our letter today deals with the question of acquisition, which it sounds like you've been in the midst of. I don't know all the details, but it's something you are in the midst of with A Kids Co. or A Kids Book About. I'm hoping we'll get some insights from you there. Thank you for joining us.
Well, I always make time for friends. That's my policy. I'm excited about the chat for today.
Well, to kick us off, this is a podcast about community conundrums, fiascos, and drama. Do you have any tea from your own experience that you'd be willing to share with us today?
Oh, Bree, do I have some tea? My stock in trade is I make children's books on really tough topics. So the company that I started at Kids Co., we've made books on white privilege, racism, climate change, love, depression, anxiety, and all books designed for 5 to 9-year-olds to start big conversations. It started when I wrote a kid's book about racism for my own children about 5 years ago. And I've had the wonderful privilege of getting to visit elementary schools to share my book. And as soon as principals realized that I would show up for free, like every principal in the Portland metro area decided that I should come speak at their kids' school. It's thrilling. Like literally every week, every other week, I speak with kindergartners through 5th graders. I tell them my story about my book, about being comfortable talking about racism and navigating it and all the other cool things. And then I have kids pitch me books at the end. So I was out in what for me was like the sticks in Oregon. I was born and raised in Portland. Like I need these city streets. I need the concrete. That's my thing. And like an hour drive out of the city, deep Hillsboro, I'm at this wonderful little elementary school, really diverse, really incredible. And I'm speaking with the kindergartners through 5th graders. And I do my thing. I share my story. I talk about racism. I read my book to the kids. I engage them in a meaningful conversation on it. And then I ask them, what would you write about if you could write a kid's book about anything? I finish, huge applause. Everybody's happy. And as the kids are exiting the gym, a gentleman comes up to me who clearly works there. And he just mumbles under his breath, you should be ashamed of yourself. I thought I misheard him at first, because usually it's all love in these contexts, kids, school. And he's like, you should really be ashamed of yourself. And I said, why? And he's like, racism is not a part of kids' lives. It has nothing to do with them. And you are doing serious damage by sharing this message with them. In that moment, I could have been hurt. I could have been shocked. I could have been angry. But I was polite and I disagreed with him. And I said, I don't think you're right. I think for especially Black and brown kids here, they're already experiencing it. Like, oh, it might not be your experience, but it seems appropriate if they're already experiencing it, maybe to talk about it. And for other kids to know about it. That makes a lot of sense to me. He disagreed. He walked away. Another teacher, oh my God, I'm so sorry, who heard that, mortified. I did some reflecting on the drive home and I thought, this is why I do this work. This is why I show up into these communities, into these spaces, not because everybody loves me and loves my book and loves to talk about racism and thinks it's important, but because a lot of people don't think it's important. A lot of folks don't think it's a part of kids' lives. A lot of folks don't think it's a real thing. And how important is it for me to show up in those communities and share my message, which is really just a simple, soft, easy message, which this is a topic that's okay to talk about and learn to navigate. And we should all treat each other well because of the color of our skin and not treat each other poorly. This is 101 stuff, right? This is kindergarten stuff because I'm speaking with kindergartners. And I took courage out of that. The principal reached out afterwards and said, I'm so sorry. I cannot believe this happened. I'm sorry I wasn't there to step in. And I just had one message back from him. I go, don't let this guy lose his job because of what he said to me. Like, the lesson he'll take out of that is all these people are bad and they've been infected with this woke mind virus and blah, blah, blah. I go, just be honest with them. And this is an Asian American woman who's going, yeah, I know racism's real. It's why we brought you to the school, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, don't fire him, engage with him. Because I go, these are conversations that have to keep happening if we're actually going to make change. That's just a little bit of tea on my adventures in the elementary school space, sharing my book.
Wow. Okay. I'm blown away on a couple levels. One, I think you get thrown into probably some of the darkest, murkiest, shittiest stuff happening. Primarily online where there's less accountability. And I can only imagine, even in person, there's obviously you are thrown right into the midst of it. And I think it's so easy to, number one, get defensive. Number two, just be tired of it. Like I can imagine it would take a lot of patience to maintain that posture of peace building and creating bridges rather than burning them down. And especially when your books tackle and look straight on and speak very clearly about some of the toughest topics that as a society we are discussing. I just want to thank you for doing that work. It's tremendous. I hope that our listeners can all, one, learn from your example, but two, feel inspired to lean into the spaces where we can have those conversations and treat everybody like kindergartners. That's one of the takeaways I'm having. Thank you. Secondly, you mentioned it so quickly, but I loved the community little design piece that you brought in where you asked the kids what kind of books they would create. This brings me back to what you did in that room when Ben Sand wrote a kid's book about white privilege, the platform of each book to help other people access their own stories. Where did that come from for you? Is that just inherent? Is that something that you've had to foster over time? There's such good seeds of community building baked into your process.
There's a handful of influences. I think I played on teams most of my life as a kid, basketball, soccer, track. Everybody always had a role, and that meant everybody always had value to bring. No team ever won because one person did all the things. And I kept that with me, that sort of everybody has value to bring. It might look different than somebody else's, but they have value. In college, I remember a professor being able to take the person in the class that I thought was worst performing and pull out the most incredible insight from their own words. And I thought, just some sort of magic trick. And I realized, oh, I've discounted this person's intelligence or abilities, or and this professor had this uncanny way of raising the bar and everybody achieving it somehow. And then when it came to making these books, there was something in me that had this core belief in the same way that when I wrote my book for my kids, I didn't feel like I was the right person, but I had a story to tell and I'm an expert on my story. And nobody can tell me it's not my story or that I don't know the most about it. And I thought, everybody has that. So my job is to find that story, tease that story out, create a safe space that's vulnerable, creative, exciting, and fun, to extract that story out and not take the credit or ownership of it, but to let that person fully sit and stand in that story and then just high five them and go, your story is incredible. And this deserves to go into a book. It deserves to make it to kids, and it deserves to have an impact. And having done that 200 plus times, I can tell you there's a lot of truth in that. I have repeated it again, and it's not because I'm special, and I really mean this. It's because we all are special. We're just special in different ways. We're not all the same. And there's a beauty to that. I try and key in my eyes, nose, mouth, and ears to find that nugget of truth inside someone. It's a bit of a fun adventure, which makes me terrible to pitch a book to. Nobody can pitch me because all I'm looking for is that thing that's almost invisible inside someone, wrapped around an idea or a topic. They almost go, oh, that's just my childhood. Or that's just some experience that I had. That's just how my parents were. You go, no, that's the thing you have for other people. Use that, lean into that, live into that.
That's so good. I can anticipate for our listeners, a lot of community managers and people whose job it is to seek that essence, that story in their members of their community, and then going the second step and connecting those people to each other. And I think that's such a good insight to pause and make sure that you're open to the people who you might least expect to find something from. It sounds like that mentor you had was incredibly generous in their interpretation of others and bringing other people alongside of them in unexpected ways. And I'm wondering practically, what are some of the things that signal to you? Maybe it's such a soft science. Is there any way that you can put into words what you look for in that story?
For me, it always comes down to truth, honesty, vulnerability, authenticity. It comes to those core things. And I think we all have a really good nose for it. We know when somebody's being fake. We fully know it. We know when somebody's lying. We know when somebody's being inauthentic. And we also know when somebody's being fully themselves. It almost can make us feel uncomfortable. What gives them the right to be okay or comfortable or even happy. And I think able to identify that authenticity, validate it, and then allow someone to expound upon it, to create more space for it, which ultimately I think requires a high degree of an ability to feel uncomfortable. When someone gets vulnerable, it is the opposite of let's go grab a Frappuccino at Starbucks and chat about the game. It's just the opposite of that thing. It can be very casual and fun and comfortable. It can be like painful and it can call up your own emotions. And so again, that ability to be able to do that allows you to make more space for others to do that. I have some unique special gift in not bullshitting and just going there. And so it creates space for other folks to go, oh, wow, I guess I can go there too. Which is why when we make these books, we call it the workshop method, and we start with personal story. And instead of having the author share their very vulnerable personal story first, we go. I don't even remember making that book. And you set it on the table. By the time everyone's gone and the author's ready to go, oh, well, if I don't do that, like I'm a jerk. Everybody's heart's on the table and I'm going to keep mine in a little cage. I got to go there too. And then once you've done that, especially in a safe group context, everybody's, whoa, look at all this weight, this value, this meaning. And then you even look at your own, you go, I'm seeing things here that I never saw because I kept it all bottled and locked up. So again, this is all very soft science stuff, but it's just about being able to sit in that, be able to truly get vulnerable, not perform, not be important, do the song and dance, but just to be fully you. And then only after that, you do the work. And once you've done the first part, I can tell you the second part is so easy. Like writing these books is so easy. It's stupid easy because we've done the hard part, which is get real and real vulnerable with a group of people and then do the creative work, and the creativity flows. We could write 10 books in that time just because it's so easy flowing, which then leads me to believe that we often are trying to do creative work totally blocked up. Right? So we're easily offended. Our ego's all wrapped up in our idea, and forget about a brainstorm because now it's like, how do I seem like the smartest person in this room? Not how do we make something meaningful? And so trying to solve for that first part first actually does the work of the second part, which I think is already available there if it has the pathways to walk.
This podcast is sponsored by Ember Consulting, where I'm the founder and head community creator. At Ember, we help people who are familiar with running their business on content, coaching, or consulting become community powered. As you hear in this podcast, creating a community is really tough and managing it can be even harder. So don't do it alone. Whether you're looking to launch a new community or pivot your strategy, our one-on-one consulting helps you skip the learning curve and do it right the first time. And when you're ready to belong to a space just for community creators learning, testing, and growing their communities together, check out the Ember community. Now, back to the episode.
That was so good. I just want to swap the word you used, which was like writing a book, and replace it with building a community. Because it's the exact same process. And I think I have two main takeaways. Number one is the foundation of articulating your values within the space that's being gathered, whether it's like a one-time event or an ongoing space where people are a part of. The values of vulnerability, honesty.
These are very basic things, and yet we lose them under the guise of professionalism or trying to inflate our own importance.
So I think number one, making sure that those values are front and center. And the second thing I heard is that the person facilitating the experience, in our case, often the community manager, has to set the pace for living out those values and showing our members exactly what they look like. I think an example that comes to mind in the community space is creating a social contract for your community. And in the very first session or very first time you're gathering together, asking your members, hey, what has happened in your past experience with community that has allowed you to show up fully as yourself? What are some of the things that occurred to allow you to be your most generous, curious, honest self? And the second piece is, what are some of the things that may have happened in your past that constrained you from showing up as your most honest, vulnerable, authentic self? It sets the tone. If each time you revisit that social contract, take notes on what people say, and you can open the floor at each session and say, okay, this is what we talked about last time. This is our social contract. Does anything need to be adjusted? Does anything need to be removed? But it really sets the landscape for your members to gather and embody the values that you want to see.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. A community can't go further than you can take them. They will do what you do. You can say all sorts of stuff, but culture is what you do, not what you say. And they will act like you act. If you step all over people, if you try and be the most talkative person in the room, if you dismiss people's ideas, they will do that. But if they watch you protect people, if they watch you be kind, if they watch you go the extra mile, be flexible, go, oh, it's okay, I understand you can't make it, let's make it next week. They'll take on that mantra. I'm amazed how much leaders at companies or leaders in communities want their community to do a thing they do not do. Where's that expectation coming from? Like, you must do those things. First, you are the prototype, the model, and you are setting the tone to say, here's what's okay in this group. Here's what I prize. Here's what I value. People are really responsive to that. That's why I also think when you have really negative, bad, unhealthy, bad actor type communities, you just look right to the top of that group of folks. You go, they're just doing like they see. Forget what's on paper. Forget what the values are. Forget the 10 commandments of how our community operates. They're just doing what they see, and you can't be mad at them for it.
Oh my gosh, that was like a mic drop moment for me. I'm going to pull that quote. I see this so frequently because it's an incredibly powerful model, especially when partnered with business. And to your point, when it's not coming from a place of authenticity and vulnerability and you setting the pace for that connection, it will crumble faster than your cookie possibly could. Like, it's a really hard method and business strategy. And I think the piece too that came to mind, or another example that came to mind, is I get a lot of clients and people who really want the connection in their community to be super strong. Every community has a combination of education and connection. It's safer for me to put out a lot of content in my community than it is for me to start like truly authentically connecting with my members. And then when they don't see their members authentically connecting to each other, they wonder why. And I think you just nailed the foundation of why, which is if your community members are not connecting genuinely with each other, maybe ask yourself, how have you genuinely connected with your members? Let's start with the past 30 days and see where that takes you. Sometimes these all just close back the loop at the end. So I'm curious how our letter leads us back into all this. But are you ready for the letter I prepared for you?
Of course.
Okay. Dear Bree, I've been hired on to manage a community for a training program, and I'm specifically focused on creating a community for the alumni once they are finished with the training program. The end goal here is clear: acquisition. My job is to get it up and running, thriving and vibrant, and provide a ton of business value so it's appealing for acquisition. So far, it's been tough, and I'm struggling to get the alumni to engage with each other. They've been out of the program for quite some time now and didn't have proper nurturing. I have a strategy. It's been approved, but I feel these bigger looming questions on my shoulders every day. Is this strategy sustainable? Will it work? And even more stressful is the looming goal of acquisition for this community. It's already difficult to show a direct correlation between what's happening in the community and the ROI for the business. But I feel a lot of pressure to create a community that shows a lot of ROI. And at the same time, this acquisition is somewhat suffocating my ability to serve and care for the community well. Signed, Constrained in Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
Does any piece of this letter resonate with you or intrigue you?
Yeah, I can feel the angst and the feeling like there are these warring or competing goals. fear of where do I allocate my time to where it'll be most valuable, while also not losing this caretaking of the community and trying to do the thing that I'm being asked to do or that I want to do. I think there are a handful of principles that can be really useful here. Always keep the first thing first. Always keep that most valuable thing, that thing when your heart of hearts is really valuable, which you said, the caretaking of the community. Just start not responding to emails and avoid helping folks because you're like, I got to do acquisition. We just need as many folks in here as possible. Oh, but my boss asked me to do this, so I just need to get the numbers in. No, make sure you keep the first thing first, which is that caretaking of that community. That will always produce the most results. The second thing, and this is a principle that I would offer, is to try and think about doing things that don't scale. This is a very popular sort of Y Combinator principle that Paul Graham gave to Brian Chesky when they were building Airbnb. Will anybody ever do this? Now it's an obvious sort of foregone conclusion. But then when they were building it in early days, it was like, will this even work? And so what Paul Graham recommended them to do is to go, don't worry about scaling this business because you're going to have a heck of a time just like getting someone to sleep on somebody else's couch. Go do something that doesn't scale, that requires an enormous amount of work to do one, and then even more work to do two, and even more work to do three. And every time requires a lot of work, but you get real results and real learnings. So they, for the early listings, spoke with all of the hosts. They were like almost all in New York at this time or San Francisco. They traveled there. They visited their places. They sat down with them. They interviewed them. This is like very boots on the ground work. And they realized all the hosts had the same problems. So they started to fix some of these problems. And one of the main ones was photography. So they dusted off an old camera and took photographs for all the early listings. Again, founders of companies, this does not scale. This is like the worst use of your time. But if it's between that and death, you go, oh man, like even if I can get a handful of listings really great, eventually every listing on Airbnb had beautiful photos of houses and places. Now, if you go on Airbnb, you don't even think about it, but you go, all these places are beautiful. Even if it's some crummy basement somewhere, like it looks beautiful. It's because they go, oh, we need great photographs of these things for folks to be willing to stay here. So it's a small example of doing something that doesn't scale. That idea of whether it's the caretaking side, or I'll even take the stated goal, which is acquisition. What's something that doesn't scale? Hopping on the phone with somebody and spending a half an hour doing that. Showing up to their house, right? Asking, hey, like there's a debt there to be paid or an involvement, a bought-inness to that thing that they're doing. I don't even know what this community is related to. But if you've got alumni of something that you can be involved with, and it's like figuring out, what can I do from just a person-to-person perspective that doesn't scale, but will produce results. And maybe I can figure out later how to reduplicate that and get that to scale in a larger way later. We are so used to things that scale. Everything's depersonalized. It's total opposite of community. Like we're all these email lists. Everything's like swap out this name in this like spot, but it's like a totally generic email. But it requires thinking out of the box a little bit, which goes back to the idea of caretaking. Those things that don't scale are examples of caretaking. Last bit is this idea of just the purpose of the community in general. Yes, I understand the acquisition element is important, but caretaking is even more so. What am I actually offering of value to this community that makes them want to be here? They're not just hostages that I have somehow captured and forced to stay here, and I'm dangling little carrots and crumbs to go, oh, well, at the end of the month, if you stay around long enough, I'll give you some coupon. But they feel some real value. And then it's really taking a hard look to go, what would get me to stay here? What would get me to feel like I did this thing, I'm an alumni of it, I want to come back and be engaged with it. What's that value being offered? And that's when proof is in the pudding. Either you have it or you don't, or you have it for some group of people and not for some other group of people, and that's okay. But really trying to offer some material value. We as consumers operate this way every day. I had remarked about your headphones. I have the same headphones. I love those headphones. They are good headphones. I would buy them again if the ones I had broke because they're that good. price is not an issue because the headphones are that good. That's value, right? And so the big question this letter writer has to ask is, what kind of value can I offer that's so good that gets them to stick around and stay? This is why credit cards have rewards programs. This is why airlines have their point system. Value. We are always looking for value in the communities that we're a part of. Even if they seem invisible, we are looking for them because they're so important.
Okay, just to recap those three key points. Keep the main thing. And in community, it is how to serve your members. Number 2, before we can even ask the question of how do we scale this community, we have to ask, how do we serve our members? The goal is learning that. I heard in that, do things that don't scale, do things that give you a good test, give you a good experiment where you can learn what is important to them, which leads us to the third piece, which is once you've done that hard work of things that don't scale so that you can learn from your members, what is the thing that's going to drive value for them, and designing your community around that experience.
That was much better than my meandering.
No, you took us on such a good journey. Do you have any insights or takeaways? Can you share anything about your own acquisition? Would you call it an acquisition, this movement to DK? Can you share anything about?
Yeah, no, I can share about it. And this is a great sort of nod back to value, right? So started a Kids Co., originally named a Kids Book About, but we expanded into a media company. So it's been a Kids Co. And 5 years ago. And we do books, we do podcasts, we've been developing a couple TV shows, we did an app, we've done a bunch of video content, the whole 9 yards, all empowering stories for kids, all nonfiction. And we had built this really wonderful relationship with the folks at Penguin Random House and DK. DK is based in the United Kingdom. It's been around for 50 years. It is an iconic kids book brand. That relationship turned into a partnership. That partnership turns into a licensing agreement. And we had a really great relationship with them. And eventually just made sense to go, they're such great caretakers of our books. And there's so much opportunity to grow what we've done with our books as a company. We entered in discussions with them about 10 months ago, ultimately decided that it made a lot of sense for them and for us to sell them our publishing business. All of the authors that were Kids Co-authors became DK authors. All of the books that sat under the Kids Co banner moved over to DK. I officially have moved over there, as well as holding a role at Kids Co, as VP and publisher under the A Kids Book About imprint. Got to take all my books along with me with the mandate to make the same kinds of books that are challenging, empowering, and important for kids, really of all ages. And that deal made sense because I got to offer value to our authors, for them to be a part of a bigger, broader ecosystem with more resources. Value for my team, right? To have, instead of being at an up and down startup, they're really secure jobs, right? For me to have more resources to deploy at making some really great books, as well as getting to keep my company intact and pursue that. And overnight, my company was able to just the whole P&L changed because now all of these cash burdens came off the P&L and moved over to DK. The business became break even or profitable just overnight. Those media ambitions that I have around telling kids stories through video and audio still remain, and I still get to pursue those things. And hopefully for customers, they just get more stories, right? Kids get more stories otherwise would not have been made. And I really wanted to triangulate that whole value matrix. I didn't want anybody to get cut out of that. Even investors, that was a big calculation on my part. A lot of money has been invested in this business. There is a transaction I can do where that disappears and the value that we've created disappears for them and they get a donut out of this. I didn't want that to happen. So we spent a long while trying to find the right deal that was going to truly be good for everyone. And I'm a big believer in having your cake and eating it too. Any scenario where I can find where I get both of those things, I'm trying to seek out best of both worlds.
I hear a strong commitment to the win for all the stakeholders, of which there were many in this scenario. A couple of things I heard. Number one is, I think there's a tone in this letter that's frankly kind of transactional. I think I'll be a little harsh with our letter writer and say, if that's the posture from which you and your team are approaching acquisition, you can say goodbye to creating a meaningful and valuable space for your members. What I heard in your story is that not only there was so much patience and forethought into making sure that this partnership was aligned with your mission to create more books on important, empowering, and challenging topics, and that it furthered the value already created. And number 3, that partnership didn't come out of thin air, that this is actually something that has been slow cooking, marinating for a long time. The transactional mindset doesn't have the long game in mind. They're only thinking about the acquisition, the end price tag, the end product. That mindset isn't always willing to do the things that are required to get the result they want. I took a lot away from what you just shared.
Yeah. And I wonder in the context of letter writer, whether that top down sort of leadership, the values coming from there of going, hey, we really care about acquisition. Like, however you got to get there, you got to get there. And it's almost like sometimes you got to take lemons and turn it into lemonade and go, I know this is the thing they want. The path there is a real, true, vibrant, meaningful, valuable community for its members. If we do that, then these other things follow as opposed to the reverse.
A good question to ask when you're in this situation as a community manager is, can you remind me of what our mission, values, and vision are for this community? And how does an acquisition in the long run align with our mission, vision, and values? When you ask that question, I think it'll be really clarifying for both you and your higher ups. Maybe there actually is a deeper mission and vision involved here, and we've just thrown around acquisition as like this end result, but it really is there's a deeper meaning. Or maybe you'll realize that there is bigger misalignment, and maybe you need to ask for more support in different areas to get that result, but you yourself take it upon yourself to lead from a place of mission and values. I think there's still a lot of power for individuals, even if you don't have a super supportive higher management. We have a lot of ability to set the tone in the community as the manager. But I think that question really helps clarify what's going on.
Yeah. And I'll just be frank, like most people write down these things, mission, vision, values, and they're total bullshit. They're things that they believe their company should have on paper to show some sort of moral standing or belief, but those things really come down to the things you do in the company, what your real culture is. And when there's mismatch, what people start to embody is that one of our values is to never be straightforward. Say one thing, do another thing. That's okay here. In fact, it's important. Don't come out and say it. We're after the money, but we don't put that on paper. People are smart, and companies act this way, communities act this way, teams act this way. And in a weird way, we all know it. You can look from the outside and go, I know exactly what they're about. This is also why we fall in love with brands and fall out of love with brands. It's a reflection of our own values. We go, oh yeah, I love it. They just speak their mind and they don't care if they hurt anybody's feelings. I believe that too. That's why I'm in love with what they do. And so again, that sort of synchronicity of be attractive to those kinds of people that want to be a part of your thing that you are doing. Not that you're just broadcasting and saying. This is why I avoided writing down a mission for a Kids Co for a very long time. That it won't matter. What will matter is what we do. And I should be able to ask any one of our customers, hey, what do you think our mission is? And they should be able to get within 10 degrees of closeness through their own words, just based on how we've behaved, not because there's something on our website that just says words that either may or may not be true. And it was after some years that I was like, I think I know what we've been up to. I think I know what we've already been doing. Let me just codify that into some words. Absolutely.
Wow. Jelani, thank you so much for sharing some time, and thank you for the creative and communal work that you do and the topics that you embrace and bring more light to, the authors that you elevate. It's really inspiring work, and I'm so glad we got to glean some of your community expertise in this episode.
Thanks, Brie. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for sharing some space with me on this episode. Please like and review wherever you find your podcasts. To submit your own community conundrum, fiasco, or other drama, go to the link in the show notes. Aloha and catch you next time.